The courtroom was almost silent, like the whisper of the wind before a storm. In the back row, Clara Mendez sat with her eyes fixed on the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wore a simple dress, the kind that speaks more of dignity than fashion, and worn shoes that couldn't hide the weariness of a life dedicated to honest work. Across from her, the lawyer Esteban Rivas adjusted his gold cufflinks, a smug smile on his face. Known for his history of crushing victories, his reputation wasn't that of a defender of justice, but a destroyer of hope. He didn't just win cases, he steamrolled them. The conflict was clear. Clara, a widow from the village, faced an eviction order driven by a company that coveted her land. No one expected her to resist, no one except her. But what Esteban didn't know was that Clara wasn't as alone as she seemed, and what appeared to be an easy case for him would become one of the biggest humiliations of his career. Because sometimes the truth doesn't need money or power, it just needs the right moment to be heard. This is the story of how a humble woman defied a corrupt system. And she did it with the only weapon she had, her truth. Stay until the end, because what you're about to see will not only move you, it might also inspire you. Subscribe now and don't miss a second of this realistic, impactful, and deeply human story. Clara Mendez had lived her entire life in the same neighborhood, a simple place where everyone knew each other. Her home was a small adobe house on a forgotten corner of the neighborhood, surrounded by a garden that, despite the difficulties, always bloomed thanks to her dedication. Her life, though modest, had been full of love and effort, especially after the death of her husband Mario, who had been a worker at the local factory. When Mario passed away in a work accident, Clara not only lost her life partner, but also the only source of income for her son, Andres, a young man with a disability who depended completely on her. Although the circumstances were difficult, Clara never lost faith. Her life was marked by a constant struggle, but she always held her head high. She was a strong, determined woman who had never allowed poverty or adversity to steal her dignity. That morning, Clara woke up before the sun. It was her custom to get up early, prepare breakfast for Andres, and then, with her heart full of hope, go to the market to sell the fruits and vegetables she grew in her garden. It was hard work, but she did it with love. Andres, as always, stayed at home, reading his favorite books, unaware that this would be the last quiet morning he would have. As Clara headed to the market, she couldn't shake the notice she had received 2 days ago. The trial was near. The real estate company Las Torres del Sol had initiated a process to evict her. The land on which she lived, along with that of other families in the area, had been bought at low prices by a company that wanted to build luxury apartment buildings. Clara's case was just one of the many legal battles in which the powerful businessmen were involved, but for her it was much more than a simple matter of property. It was her life, her home, the place where Andres had grown up. At the market, Clara tried to do the same as always, sell her products, chat with the neighbors, and keep going with a smile. But something was different that day. A strange feeling invaded her, a sense that the wind was blowing stronger and that the storm was approaching. She knew she couldn't continue ignoring the fact that there was something much bigger at stake. That night, upon her return, she found a letter on the kitchen table. The date of the trial was set for next week. The company's lawyers had already begun to pressure her. That same afternoon, Clara decided that she would not give up without a fight. Although the odds were against her, something inside her told her that she had to fight. Not only for her house, but for the memory of Mario, for Andres, and for all those who had no voice in that neighborhood forgotten by justice. She decided to go to a lawyer who could represent her, but she knew it would be difficult to find someone willing to face such a powerful corporation. Returning to her house, she thought about the difficult days they had gone through. She reminded herself how she had overcome Mario's death, how she had raised Andres with love and sacrifice. And as she thought about all that, her eyes fell on the small altar she had placed in the corner of her living room, where a candle was always lit. It was her way of feeling connected to the memory of her husband and of finding comfort in moments of despair. Then she decided that she was not alone. She couldn't be. In the neighborhood, Don Anselmo, an old man who had always witnessed the history of the neighborhood, had encouraged her not to give up. "The truth always finds its way, Clara, no matter how many try to hide it," he had told her in one of their many conversations. Clara leaned back in her chair, looking at the candlelight, and an idea began to take shape in her mind. Perhaps she didn't have the resources or the power of the company, but she did have something much more valuable: her faith, her community, and her truth. No one could take that away from her. The day of the trial arrived quickly, like a shadow that lengthens without warning. Clara got up early, dressed in her best outfit, although she knew it wasn't enough to compare with the ostentation of the lawyers representing Las Torres del Sol. The face of Esteban Rivas, the company's main lawyer, appeared on billboards in the city, on television, and even in renowned magazines. He was the kind of man everyone feared, with an enviable portfolio of victories and an egocentrism that made him even more fearsome. Clara, on the other hand, barely had enough to cover the cost of transportation to the city. The day before, she had borrowed a small suit from a neighbor, who always helped her in those moments of need. With sweaty hands and a racing heart, she got on the bus heading to the courthouse. Her son Andres hugged her before she left, not fully understanding what was happening, but trusting his mother, as he always had. The courthouse was large, imposing, with marble walls that reflected the light in a blinding way. When Clara arrived, there were already several cases in progress, but what caught her attention the most was the behavior of Esteban Rivas. He walked with a haughty posture, adjusting his silk tie and greeting everyone as if he were at a social event. It wasn't just his clothing that made him seem so intimidating, but his aura of power, his way of speaking, of walking, and his arrogant attitude. It seemed that no one could stop him, that everything was already resolved from the beginning. When she entered the room, Esteban was quick to give Clara a cold look, as if he saw her as a nuisance. Clara's hands trembled, but her determination kept her upright. It wasn't the first time she had faced adversity, but it was the first time she found herself in a room full of lawyers like Esteban, who treated people like objects in a power game. "Mrs. Mendez," the clerk called her, interrupting her thoughts. Clara stood up with a firm step and walked towards the stand, where the eyes of those present focused on her. Esteban, from his seat, watched her with a mocking smile, as if he were waiting for her to make a mistake. And it was no wonder. He had in his possession a large amount of evidence that, according to him, made it impossible for Clara to win. "Do you see this document, Mrs. Mendez?" Esteban began with his unmistakable tone of superiority. "It is the official purchase of your property by Las Torres del Sol. According to the terms of the agreement, you were fairly compensated for your land. There is nothing illegal in what we are doing." Clara, although surprised by the attitude from the first moment, remained firm. "That money doesn't cover even half of what I have invested in this place. And besides, it wasn't a fair agreement, it was an imposition. My husband worked in that factory for years, and now they want to strip me of the only thing I have. I can't let that happen." Esteban laughed softly, almost with contempt, and then continued with his exposition. As he did so, Clara felt anguish invade her. The company's lawyers began to expose details of her case coldly, showing documents that Clara did not fully understand, but that seemed to be irrefutable proof of her failure. "This doesn't make sense," Clara thought. "They have everything they need to win. And what do I have? Just a house that no one wants." But then she remembered the words of Don Anselmo, the wise old man of the neighborhood. "The truth cannot be hidden forever, daughter. Sometimes it takes time, but in the end, it arrives." Despite the pressure and intimidation, Clara did not give in. Her gaze hardened, her heart beat strongly, but within her something stronger than fear began to emerge, the certainty that she was not alone. That small corner of the world where she lived, where she fought for her son, had a power that Esteban could never understand. The trial continued, but Clara, although cornered by the imposing presence of Esteban, never lost her focus. She knew that, although the road would be long and difficult, the fight was just beginning. Esteban, for his part, continued with his arrogant confidence, but something in the air had changed. It was clear that this case would not be like the others. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. After what happened in court, she felt a mixture of powerlessness and despair, but also something new, a fire that she couldn't extinguish. Esteban Rivas, the powerful lawyer, had proven to be a formidable obstacle. Every time she tried to face him, he reduced her with his disdain, with his overwhelming presence. But something had changed. Clara was not going to let her house, her life, fall into the hands of a man who saw people as pieces on a chessboard. No, she knew that there was something more, something that she had not yet discovered, something that could make a difference. As the night progressed, her mind did not stop working. She decided to go to the small corner of the house where she kept memories of her late husband, Mario. A few days before the trial, she had found an old wooden box with some letters and papers that he had kept for years. She hadn't given it much importance, as she believed they were just memories of a past time. But now, with her mind fixed on the trial, she decided to open it. At first, she only found photographs of her wedding, notes from Mario that he had left her when they went on trips, and some documents related to his work in the factory. But something caught her attention at the bottom of the box, a yellowish letter, with the ink barely legible. It was dated more than 10 years ago, and the recipient was not her, but the boss of the factory, a man whose name Clara had heard few times. With trembling hands, Clara unfolded the letter. Mario wrote it in a moment of uncertainty after learning that the company was buying land in the area where they lived. In the letter, Mario revealed that he had found something irregular in the company's transactions, something that didn't fit. He wrote with fear, warning that if something ever happened to him, that letter should be delivered to the authorities. Mario had never trusted large corporations, but the fear of losing his job had led him to remain silent. "There is something in the documents that doesn't add up," the letter said. "I have seen false signatures in several contracts, and I have heard conversations that I don't like. If something happens to me, this letter is the proof." Clara's heart stopped for a moment. That was what she needed. The letter not only revealed an irregularity in the transaction of the land, but it could also prove that the company was operating fraudulently. The piece she had been looking for so long was in front of her. Despite the fatigue, Clara couldn't stop reading the letter again and again. Mario had suspected, had fought in his own way, but he could never do anything due to the pressure of his job. Now she, his wife, had in her hands something that could change everything. Over time, she realized that that letter could be the key to uncovering the corruption that had been dominating her life and that of so many other families in the neighborhood. She had to find a way to use it, to take it to trial, but she couldn't do it alone. She needed a lawyer, but not just anyone. She needed someone willing to fight against the powerful. The next day, Clara went to Don Anselmo's small shop, where people from the neighborhood used to gather to talk about everything. There she found Sofia Delgado, a young law intern who was starting her career. Sofia had grown up in the neighborhood, and Clara had known her since she was little. Although in her youth Sofia had left the neighborhood to study in the city, she had always maintained a close relationship with the people of the community. Sofia looked at her with interest when Clara explained the situation. "I have an idea," Sofia said, after listening to the story. "I know I don't have much experience, but I know some lawyers who might be willing to take your case if I have evidence. If what you say about the letter is true, this could change everything." Sofia was quick to organize a meeting with one of those lawyers, someone who had a good reputation in cases like Clara's. If they managed to gather enough evidence, they could counteract Esteban's attempts to win the trial. But they also knew it wouldn't be easy. There was still much to do, and time was running out. With Mario's letter in hand, Clara felt that something had begun to move in her life. Although she didn't have the money or resources of large corporations, she had something much more powerful: the truth. And she was willing to use it, no matter what she had to lose. The trial had taken an unexpected turn. Clara felt that with each passing day, the odds of winning were diminishing, even though she now had Mario's letter as her greatest hope. She had given the letter to Sofia and her lawyer, who were preparing a solid defense. However, the day Esteban Rivas presented his first round of evidence, things started to get even more complicated. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The judge, an older, serious man, watched attentively as Esteban rose from his seat with his usual arrogant demeanor. Clara stood tall, but her hands trembled as she watched Esteban prepare to deliver the first blow. "Your Honor," Esteban began, his voice resonating through the room with overwhelming confidence, "allow me to present the evidence that proves beyond any doubt that Mrs. Mendez not only accepted fair compensation for her land, but also signed a legal contract in which she committed to vacate the property within a reasonable time frame. Everything was agreed upon. Everything is legal." Esteban presented a series of documents, each more official than the last. Signatures, seals, notarized contracts, and photographs that showed Clara had received the money from the sale of her property, and that, according to local laws, she had no right to resist the eviction. Clara looked at the papers, and for a moment she felt that all was lost. The documents seemed authentic. Esteban had presented them so impeccably, with such certainty that even she began to doubt. How could there be anything hidden in those papers if everything seemed to be in order? But then, Clara remembered something she had forgotten. In the days leading up to the trial, Sophia had reviewed all the documents carefully, and something didn't add up. When the company's lawyers presented their last piece of evidence, Sophia leaned towards Clara, her gaze determined. "Look closely. Something's not right," she whispered. Esteban had finished presenting his case, and Clara felt a knot in her stomach. But at that moment, Sophia stood up. "Your Honor, I object." The courtroom fell silent as all eyes turned to the young intern, who, with surprising calm, walked to the stand. "It is true that Mrs. Mendez signed an agreement, but there is something I must point out," she said, looking directly at Esteban. "One of the signatures on this contract has been forged." The murmur in the room intensified. Clara couldn't believe what she was hearing. "A forged signature? How was that possible?" Sophia explained that after reviewing the documents, she found that Clara's signature on one of the contracts did not match the ones she had made previously. Furthermore, she discovered that the dates on the documents had been altered to make it appear that Clara had signed after receiving the payment, when in reality, the agreement had been made under pressure and manipulation. "This is inadmissible," Sophia said firmly, looking at the judge. "These documents are fraudulent, and this court cannot allow evidence based on lies to be presented." The atmosphere in the room changed immediately. The judge, who until that moment had been an impassive spectator, rose from his seat and asked that the documents be reviewed again. The tension was palpable. Esteban, for the first time in the entire trial, seemed to lose his composure. His face, normally impassive, now showed signs of discomfort. The strategy he had prepared so carefully was beginning to crumble. "This is an absolute lack of respect," Esteban muttered, trying to maintain his calm. "It is impossible for the documents to be false. How can you claim such a thing without clear evidence?" "Clear evidence, I have it," Sophia replied firmly. "If you allow us, Your Honor, we can present evidence that the signatures were altered and that the documents were modified with the intention of harming Mrs. Mendez." The judge asked that all the evidence be reviewed in more detail. The room fell into a tense silence as the lawyers prepared for what appeared to be an unexpected change in the direction of the trial. Clara looked around, unable to believe what was happening. The feeling of anguish she had felt since the beginning of the trial was fading, replaced by a small spark of hope. Although there was still a long way to go, this moment was crucial. It wasn't just about winning the case, but about showing that the truth always has a way of coming to light, no matter how hard the powerful try to hide it. The court remained in recess while the lawyers retired to their offices to review the documents and prepare their arguments. Clara, her heart still pounding, walked to one of the benches in the hallway. She couldn't believe what had happened in the room. Sophia had uncovered an irregularity that could be the key to winning the trial, but she knew this was only the first step. There was more to do, more secrets to uncover. Sophia, with the energy of someone who has just won an important battle, approached Clara. "What we have done so far is just the beginning. Now we have to dig deeper. There's something else in those papers, something we haven't seen." Clara nodded, but her mind was still occupied by Mario's letter. That letter she had found weeks ago which revealed her late husband's suspicions about the company's corruption. It was then that Clara remembered someone who might have more information: Mauricio, an old colleague of Mario's who had worked with him at the factory for years. Mauricio had always been a reserved man, but Clara knew that despite his introverted nature, he had witnessed many things he couldn't say. In his time, he had talked about certain suspicious practices at the company, but he never dared to do much about it, fearing the repercussions. Clara decided to go look for him. Upon leaving the courthouse, Sophia accompanied her to her small car. As she drove towards Mauricio's house, Clara felt something inside her awaken. Her husband's past, the memory of what Mario's life had been like at the factory, began to take shape again. Mauricio's house wasn't far. It was a modest dwelling, away from the hustle and bustle of the city, like everything in that neighborhood that had never changed. Mauricio lived alone after the death of his wife in a single-story house surrounded by a small neglected garden. Clara knocked on the door gently, her heart beating faster as she thought about what she might discover. Mauricio opened the door and, upon seeing Clara, smiled shyly. "Clara, what brings you here? It's been a long time since I've seen you." "I need to talk to you, Mauricio. It's about Mario, about what he knew about the factory. I think your testimony could be crucial." Mauricio frowned and looked at Sophia, who remained by her side. "And what do you know about that? It's not something I can share so easily, Clara." Clara took a deep breath. "It's not just about us, Mauricio. It's about all the people in this neighborhood. The eviction case, the company, everything that's happening. Mario knew something, and you know it too. Please, we need your help." Mauricio was silent, looking at the ground for a moment. Then he looked up, as if a shadow of the past was tormenting him. "Mario never told me directly, Clara, but I saw things. I heard conversations, I saw documents, things that shouldn't have been done. It wasn't just a job, it was a dirty game." Clara sat in a chair in front of him, hoping to hear what she needed. "What did you see, Mauricio? I need to know." Mauricio whispered, almost as if he feared someone might hear him. "The factory was buying land illegally under the table, and what's worse, they used forged contracts so that people couldn't defend themselves. They knew they could pressure the workers, manipulate them. Mario never wanted to be part of that, but it was too late when he realized it." Clara felt the air escape her lungs. Finally, something clicked into place. Mario, her husband, had been trying to warn her. He had been more than just a common worker. He had been involved, albeit unwillingly, in a network of corruption that affected the lives of so many families. "Do you have proof of what you're saying?" Sophia asked, her gaze fixed on Mauricio. Mauricio stood up slowly and went to a small bookshelf in the corner of the room. He took out a cardboard box, opened it carefully, and from inside extracted a series of documents, old but well cared for. "These are the papers Mario asked me to keep. I don't know if they will be useful, but what's here could be key." Clara took the papers with trembling hands, knowing that she had taken another step towards the truth. With the documents in hand, she felt that the scales were tipping in her favor. What Mario had left behind, what Mauricio had witnessed, all now had a purpose: to stop the injustice, to unmask the lie. "Thank you, Mauricio," Clara said with deep gratitude. "This is more than we thought we would find. Now we have to take it to court." Mauricio nodded, and Clara left his house with a sense of relief. She knew the fight wouldn't end soon, but now she had a key piece to win. The truth was closer than ever. Clara couldn't stop thinking about what she had discovered at Mauricio's house. Those documents, which Mario had kept so carefully, could be the key to changing the course of her life and Andres's. But as the day of the trial approached, she also felt the pressure increasing. She knew that what she had in her hands could bring down the Las Torres del Sol case, but she also knew that it wouldn't be easy to bring that truth to court. Large corporations weren't defeated by a couple of falsified documents, and Esteban Rivas wasn't a man who accepted defeat so easily. That day, Clara was standing in front of the mirror in her house, looking at her reflection with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. Her hair, already sprinkled with gray, fell gently on her face, and in her eyes shone the same strength she had had when her husband had died. Despite the years, despite the struggles, Clara was still a strong, unbeatable woman. "Sophia, do you think these papers will be enough?" Clara asked, as the young law intern reviewed the documents on the small table in the living room. Sophia looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. "Yes, Clara. If we manage to prove the forgery, everything will change. But what worries me most is that Esteban is going to try to discredit us. He's not going to give up so easily, and I can assure you, he's going to go all out." Clara nodded. She had already seen him in action. Esteban wasn't a man who was intimidated by evidence. She knew he would use any dirty tactic to get what he wanted, but Clara also knew something he didn't understand. She wasn't alone. The neighborhood, her friends, her faith, all of that gave her the strength to move forward. "What worries me, Sophia, is that we're not just fighting against Esteban. We're fighting against everything he represents. He doesn't just defend a company. He defends a system that crushes the weak, that sweeps people away like dust. If we fall now, we won't just lose our house, we'll lose our dignity." Sophia looked at her with understanding, and for an instant Clara saw the same determination in her eyes. "I know what it means to you, Clara. And I know that what you're doing isn't just for you. It's for all those people who don't have a voice. We're going to fight with everything we have." The day following the trial, Clara and Sophia arrived early at the courthouse. The room was full of people, but what caught Clara's attention the most was the silence that had settled in. The attendees, some of them witnesses from the neighborhood, others simple onlookers, watched in silence, as if they sensed that something important was about to happen. Esteban arrived with his usual confidence. His perfectly tailored suit and imposing bearing left no doubt that he believed he was in control of the situation. Clara, on the other hand, felt anxiety take hold of her, but Sophia's gaze, full of support, kept her focused. "Your Honor, we bring new evidence," Sophia began, rising from her seat firmly. The murmurs in the room became more intense, and everyone turned towards her. The judge looked up, looking at Sophia seriously. "What evidence are you talking about, Miss Delgado?" Sophia didn't hesitate. With impressive calm, she placed the documents on the table in the courtroom and showed them to the judge. "These are the documents that Mrs. Mendez found, Your Honor. I can prove that the signatures on these contracts were forged and that the dates were altered to make it seem that she accepted the agreement legitimately." The air in the room became dense. Esteban was quick to rise from his seat, his face a mixture of indignation and surprise. "That's a lie. There's no way those documents are false. We're talking about legal evidence with international validity." The judge, unfazed, asked that the documents be reviewed by an expert to confirm the authenticity of the accusation. Clara felt her heart beat strongly as she watched Esteban try to maintain his arrogant posture, although doubt had already been sown on his face. Sophia, with a serene calm, continued. "What we are presenting here is not just an accusation, Your Honor. They are facts that demonstrate a conspiracy to deprive Mrs. Mendez of her property illegally. And if this is confirmed, we are not only talking about document forgery, but a much bigger crime." The judge gave the order to proceed with the review of the documents, and the tension in the room became unbearable. All eyes were on Esteban, who now seemed to have lost some of his confidence. Clara, for the first time in a long time, began to feel that justice could be on her side. While they waited for the result, Clara thought about everything she had sacrificed, about the suffering, the sleepless nights, the constant battle against fear, and at that moment, she felt something bigger than fear. She felt that her fight for the truth was worth it, no matter the cost. The court returned from its recess with an air thick with tension. The minutes seemed to stretch into infinity as the judge, his gaze fixed on the documents on the table, made his decision. The murmur in the room had transformed into an expectant silence, as if the entire building were holding its breath. Even Esteban Rivas, the lawyer for Las Torres del Sol, was uneasy. His usual arrogance had vanished, and his face was tense, more worried than Clara had imagined. "Your Honor, we have reviewed the documents that Ms. Mendez has presented as evidence, and the experts have confirmed the forgery of the signatures and the alterations to the dates on the contracts," Sophia said, breaking the silence with her clear and firm voice. The judge, an older man with an impassive face, nodded seriously. but Clara could notice a slight tension in his shoulders. "This changes the nature of the case," the judge replied, looking at Esteban. "Do you have anything further to present, Mr. Rivas?" Esteban at first said nothing. He was biting his lower lip, as if he were thinking of some strategy, some recourse to reverse the situation. Clara watched him from her place in the room, and for a moment she felt overcome by a mixture of anger and compassion. Esteban was not only defending the company that had dispossessed so many people, but he was also a man who had gambled his life for money, regardless of the lives he trampled. "What I want to present, Your Honor, is that these documents are not valid because we cannot accept evidence that has been obtained illegally," Esteban argued, in a tone that tried to be calm but failed to hide his desperation. "Illegally?" the judge responded, raising an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting that Ms. Mendez obtained these documents in some illicit manner?" "Your Honor, what I mean is that these documents have not been presented according to the law," Esteban insisted. "They cannot be taken into account in any way." Clara felt the pressure increasing in the atmosphere. Each word of Esteban seemed to try to undo what Sofia had managed to build with so much effort, but Clara was not willing to let her dream fall apart. Not this time. "The only crime here, Mr. Rivas, is the one your company is committing against the most vulnerable in this neighborhood," Clara said, slowly rising from her seat. Her voice resonated in the room, strong and clear, firmer than she would have imagined. "I am not here to win a trial. I am here to see justice done, so that my son does not grow up in a world where the rich and powerful get away with things at the expense of others." The judge looked at her with a neutral expression, but Clara saw a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. Esteban, however, was furious. "This is a fallacy. This is all a show," he shouted, raising his voice. "This trial is a waste of time." "You are not in a position to judge, Mr. Rivas," Sofia interrupted him forcefully. "This is the company's last attempt to manipulate the facts. It wasn't enough for them to manipulate legal evidence. Now they want to manipulate the emotions of the court." The room filled with murmurs, but Clara stood firm. Sofia had put into words what she herself felt. Esteban was not only defending interests, he was trying to destroy the truth. And that, more than anything, filled her with anger. The judge, at last, took the floor. "The court has taken into account the evidence presented and the allegations from both sides. However, what is at stake here is not just a property case. It is a matter of rights, of justice. This court will proceed to review the testimonies of the witnesses and then make a decision." Clara felt the weight of the moment crushing her, but something inside her kept her upright. The truth was on her side, and no matter how much Esteban tried to manipulate the situation, he could not silence her. The judge adjourned the session for the day, and everyone present rose to leave the room. Clara, with her gaze fixed on the floor, tried to process everything that had happened. When she left the courtroom, she found Sofia, who seemed as exhausted as she was. "We've done it, Clara. We've taken a huge step." But Clara knew that there was still much to fight for. The battle was not won. Although the truth had been presented powerfully, the testimonies and, above all, the final verdict were still missing. On the way back to her house, Clara thought about her son, about Mario, about everything she had lost and everything she had fought to keep. She knew that the road would not be easy, but what she did know is that she would not give up. No matter what Esteban or anyone else tried to do, she was willing to fight to her last breath. The day of the final trial had arrived. The courtroom was filled with tension, as if the entire building was waiting for the last word to be spoken. Clara was sitting on the same bench, looking ahead, her mind in complete silence. Beside her, Sofia reviewed her notes with a concentrated gesture, as if she were also fighting her own demons. The company's lawyers, led by Esteban, looked as calm as ever, but Clara could see in their eyes that something had changed. Esteban was no longer so sure of his victory. He had made a mistake in underestimating Clara and her determination, and now he was paying for it. The hearing had dragged on for weeks, but today was the day when everything would be resolved. The room was full of murmurs. The people of the neighborhood, who had been supporting Clara from the beginning, waited anxiously for the verdict. But what no one knew, what Clara had been saving for this moment, was the last piece of the puzzle that could finally make everything fit together. Clara rose slowly, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her. She walked to the stand with firm steps, without looking back. Esteban, with his usual arrogant attitude, watched her with a contemptuous smile. But Clara knew that this was her moment. Not only to win the trial, but to recover what belonged to her by right, what she had unjustly lost. When Clara arrived in front of the judge, she looked around. Sophia looked at her with a mixture of pride and hope, but Clara could not be distracted. She needed to concentrate. She needed to remember what she had come to do. "Your Honor," Clara began, in a firm voice, but full of emotion. "During this trial we have seen a lot of evidence, a lot of documents that supposedly prove that I was wrong, that my land was owned by a company that had the right to dispossess me of everything. I have heard that, in the name of the law, the life of a person, of a family, can be destroyed. And all this without considering that the truth is much more than papers, signatures, and dates." The judge watched her in silence, as if he were weighing her words. Clara continued, knowing that every word she spoke was going to make a difference. "I am not here to fight only for myself. I am here to fight for my son, for my husband, who is no longer with us, but who left a legacy of struggle, of dignity. I am here to fight for all those who, like us, do not have the voice or the power to defend themselves against the powerful, because the truth cannot be bought or manipulated, as they want to do with these documents." Clara paused, allowing her words to sink deep into everyone present. The air in the room seemed to become denser, and the judge watched attentively. Esteban had stopped smiling. Something in Clara's posture, in her courage, had disconcerted him. The scales of justice seemed to begin to tip towards Clara's side. "And today, with everything we have presented, I want to add one last piece. A piece that I know is going to change the whole course of this trial. This evidence, which was obtained by legitimate means, shows that the company Las Torres del Sol has not only manipulated contracts, but has altered the information in a fraudulent manner, with the sole purpose of dispossessing families of their homes." Clara raised her hand and showed a set of documents that she had found in her last search before the trial began. It had been a late revelation, but now she had in her hands something much bigger. The documents that Mario had kept, along with Mauricio's testimonies, were now irrefutable. Everything fit together. These documents were given to my husband by a former colleague from the factory, a key witness who was there when the corrupt decisions were made. This shows that not only my case is false, but that a whole series of transactions were manipulated to benefit those who are present here. The atmosphere in the room changed dramatically. Esteban rose from his seat, visibly altered. "That's slander. You can't present this as evidence. It has no validity." But the judge, who until that moment had remained calm, now seemed to make a firm decision. "This evidence, along with the testimonies presented, will be taken into account. The court will proceed to evaluate all the evidence and decide the final verdict." Clara knew that the battle was not over, but in her heart, she felt that she had given everything she had. Now everything depended on the judge's decision. She had put her life, her dignity, and her family at stake. She knew that no matter what happened, she could not back down. She had done the right thing, and that was the only thing that really mattered. The courtroom was silent, charged with tension. Clara felt how each word of the judge marked her destiny. After weeks of fighting, of presenting evidence, of challenging the arrogance of Esteban Rivas, the final moment had arrived. The judge looked at Esteban and then at Clara. "This court has reviewed the evidence, and the falsification of documents is clear. Las Torres del Sol acted fraudulently," he ruled. Esteban, with his usual confidence, stood up. "This is a mistake. My evidence is irrefutable," he exclaimed, but his voice no longer had the same strength. Clara stood tall, looking at the judge. "The eviction of my house was nothing more than a move by the powerful. I am not afraid to face them." The judge struck his gavel. "Ms. Mendez's property is maintained, and the case of Las Torres del Sol will be investigated. The eviction is suspended." Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Justice at last seemed to be on her side. However, there were still many obstacles ahead. Esteban was not going to give up so easily. Before Clara could relax, Esteban approached her with a venomous look. "This is not over, Ms. Mendez. My client has resources that you cannot imagine. The fight for your reputation has only just begun. There are secrets that you do not know." Clara stood still, but something clicked inside her. Esteban had not only lost the trial, now he sought to destroy her in other ways. "What else can you do?" she asked him calmly. "My life is not in your hands." With those words, Clara understood that although the battle in the courtroom had been won, the war was still far from over. Esteban had made it clear that he would use any means to take revenge. But Clara, strengthened by her victory, would not be intimidated. Her fight for the truth had only just begun. The road to justice had not been easy, and the end of the trial did not bring the complete peace that Clara expected. Esteban's threat remained present in her mind, but she was no longer afraid. She had shown that the truth, although difficult to reach, was more powerful than any obstacle. In the end, Clara understood that the real victory was not only legal but personal. She had recovered her home, her dignity, and above all, she had found the strength to fight for what was right. The future was uncertain, but she was ready to face it, knowing that the truth would always prevail.